all's fair in love and war and in business, AT&T would have wiped out the competition literally overnight. It would have taken them maybe 2 months to put MCI and Sprint and the other very fledgling competitors out of business because they had a 100-year monopoly position. They had all the best connections in the local network. You know, they knew all the specifications for all the businesses. They controlled the manufacturing of phones. They controlled the manufacturing of the switches. They had a lock on everything. So there, some regulation was necessary so that true deregulation could ultimately take place. So open for competition, see you later, you know, all's fair in love and war and in business, AT&T would have wiped out the competition literally overnight. It would have taken them maybe 2 months to put MCI and Sprint and the other very fledgling competitors out of business because they had a 100-year monopoly position. They had all the best connections in the local network. You know, they knew all the specifications for all the businesses. They controlled the manufacturing of phones. They controlled the manufacturing of the switches. They had a lock on everything. So there, some regulation was necessary so that true deregulation could ultimately take place, which has been occurring over the last 11 years. Now we're in a similar situation with the local telephone companies, where the local telephone companies, as personified primarily by the 7 regional Bell operating companies and by GTE, since they're of similar size, they own 99.8% of the local telephone market. You know, they provide the dial tone, they carry the local long-distance traffic, and they have complete monopoly hold. They own all the transmission wires. And Congress very rightly sees that competition is good for America. There's no question about that. Competition is absolutely good in any market. But to go from a market where somebody owns 99.8% of the market and to say, okay, fellas, you can now go into the long-distance business and compete freely, and by the way, you have to let people into your business and compete freely, sounds good on the surface, but in reality, GTE and US West can get into the long-distance business literally next week, whereas it would take years of planning and massive investment for any competitor to get into the local market on any sort of time frame. And so it's completely skewed the whole process. That basically allows these behemoths to use their leverage in the local market to get into the long distance market immediately and compete very effectively, while they have so many barriers against anyone interconnecting into the local markets that it will literally take years for any effective competition to be there. Just as, if I could just finish with one last example. I mean, for example, if you were to call me in Fairfield using US West right now, you would pay twice as much per minute as it costs me to call Australia from Telegroup in Fairfield. Twice as much. And that's the result of a monopoly being in place in the local arena, whereas the long-distance market is truly competitive. So competition is good, but in our opinion, there needs to be a phased transition to a truly competitive market so that local competition can have the same results in price reduction that competition has in the long-distance market.
See, what this telecommunications bill does is essentially empowers the monopoly. So the Republicans are the ones who are, uncharacteristically so, embracing an enemy to Republican principles. Republicans have always stood up for free enterprise and competition. And what this does is it empowers monopolies and really tilts the competitive playing field so vastly in their favor. And what gets crushed in this bill that's called, you know, pro-competition, which really isn't competition, because what will get crushed is competition. What is coming out now is the only way to compete is to be huge, and that squelches any kind of creativity that comes from small business, the small entrepreneur. So, in a way, you know, the Republicans have embraced the enemy, and they've embraced principles that really erode what they stand for, competition and the free market. And also uncharacteristically, the Democrats are the heroes in this one. They're the ones trying to say, no, that there should be some kind of regulation allowing the Bell operating companies, these monopolies, to enter, they can enter a competitive market if the local market is also competitive. So there should be some kind of Justice Department oversight to regulate the entry of the local companies into long distance at the same time, at the same rate as the local companies get opened up for greater competition. So I think it's really a sad, you know, it may be a sad day for free enterprise in telecommunications in America, because only the big players will be allowed to play, and the small entrepreneur will be crushed. There will be no way to enter the market.
Could your company survive?
Yeah, our company could survive. We're concerned, but our company would survive because 75–80% of our business interest is overseas. But the 20%, 25% that's domestic will be threatened.
I mean, for example, you know, we have approached GTE and a couple of the regional Bell operating companies saying, we would like to resell your local service. And they've said, firstly, they said, forget it. You know, nobody can resell our service. And we're going to go to the state public utility commissions and try and make sure that no one can ever resell our service, or at least it's a very long time. You know, if the law gets made so that you can, you know, build your own local network, fine, then you can compete against us. But that's $1 billion or $2 billion proposition. You know, they've basically been empowered by regulation for years to go out and charge you and I and, you know, all the readers of newspapers and listeners to radio shows across the United States. They've been able to go and charge them whatever they wanted to build their local network, because they have monopoly by law. And now what they're saying is, okay, on a free market basis, we have this fort with almost impregnable walls. We're not letting anybody in here. You know, you can try and build your own fort across the way, but in the meantime, we're going to use all the billions of dollars worth of profits that we've generated from this monopoly business. We're going to go into your business and crush you on the competitive field. Because long distance is competitive, local isn't. And that's really the key there. There needs, in our opinion, to be a time frame and also legislation saying, okay, local telephone companies, if you want to get into the long distance business, you must allow resale of the local business so that there is true competition. You really have to be willing to face truly competitive situation. And so far, naturally, most of them resist greatly. But the outcome for the average American will be, if all the smaller resellers out there that essentially keep AT&T and Sprint and MCI honest on a competitive level, because the resellers are the ones that have driven the price of long distance down about 50% over the last 10, 11 years since deregulation occurred, those resellers will be squeezed out of the marketplace. And then you'll have, you know, 4 or 5 or 6 AT&Ts keeping the price as high as they possibly can. You will, in effect, essentially go back to the pre-divestiture days. You'll have now more, you know, you won't have just one, you'll have maybe 8, but you will, in effect, be back to almost monopoly days, where there'll be one provider for an area. It won't be one provider for the entire U.S., but it'll be one provider for Iowa, effectively. If you want long distance, if you want service, you're going to have to pay the rate. It'll almost be the situation that many foreign countries are in right now, where you get what we call the take it or leave it bill, or the trust me bill, where a bill shows up and it says, you know, pay 2,352 Deutschmarks or die. You know, there's no call detail, there's no breakdown of how many lines you have.
If you want a phone,
yeah,
you have to pay that.
If you don't pay the bill, service gets cut off. End of story. And the U.S., in our opinion, is very much in danger of starting to go back to that type of era.
The creativity and the innovation in long distance has come from the small reseller, the entrepreneur. And that is the person, those are the people that will be crushed with this bill. The bill is looked at by Congress as the big AT&Ts and MCIs and Sprints versus the Bell operating companies. They're completely ignoring the small segment. And when you crush innovation and creativity in a marketplace, you've basically destroyed the whole free market principle of competition. So our hope right now is that President Clinton vetoes the bill that Congress will end up passing, and that there's enough strength in the opposition so that Congress, and enough unity in the opposition that Congress can't override the veto.
I think also Congress kind of got swept away by this whole, fervor on, throw all regulation to the winds. And I think that over time, if there's enough time, if there's a veto stands in the way, and then more discussion can be had, then the true end result of the, just throwing all regulation to the winds all at one time can be brought to the attention of enough Congress people that, a reasonable bill will come out. I'm happy to compete against US West and GTE in the long distance arena because I know I can beat them as long as I can compete against them on the local arena as well.
Essentially, this bill says the Bell operating companies, you can eat our lunch, but we can't eat your lunch. We're not afraid of competition. We welcome it. It makes us more creative. It makes us better business people.
Yeah, it's what lends spice to the business arena.
But it's just, we're not competing on a level playing field. That's what it comes down to. That this bill does not allow for a level playing field competition.
You've been lobbying with AT&T against this bill. How has that worked?
It's actually, it's
an uncomfortable arrangement.
It's almost distasteful to be on the same side of an issue with AT&T. But
we prefer to be cast as giant killers with the David versus a whole battalion of Goliaths.
But AT&T is
on this
correct
particular
on this particular
issue. And they're clearly exploiting the small reseller and help to fight their battle, but that's okay because we're exploiting AT&T to fight our battle. When I went to visit Senator Grassley in Washington D.C. and I entered his office with the AT&T lobbyist, and I mentioned to Senator Grassley, I said, "You're not going to believe this, Senator Grassley, but for once I happen to be on the same side of an issue as AT&T." And Senator Grassley grabbed his forehead and fell out of his chair, writhing on the floor, saying, "I can't believe it, it's too shocking." And if you know Senator Grassley, that seemed to be pretty out of character. So I must have really shocked him.
What have you been doing in Congress? What's your lobbying activity?
Well, the TRA, the Telecommunications Resellers Association, it's a 320-member association that Telegroup is a member of.
And that Cliff is on the board of directors.
The TRA is part of the CLDC, the Competitive Long Distance Coalition. AT&T, MCI, Sprint, and another industry association known as Comtel are the primary 5 members of that association. Just been approaching all the different members of Congress and their staffs, educating them on the economic issues. The House Committee on Telecommunications passed through committee a bill that, in our opinion, was quite balanced. It said, okay, you can get into this industry, local telephone companies can get into the long-distance industry and the cable industry, but they have to show that there is real competition in the local industry, in the local telephone business. And they defined what that had to be, that at least 10% of the business had to be going off to competitors somewhere or another, that there at least was a spark of competition alive. That bill went through committee. Once it got through committee, there was a huge wave actually coming down from Gingrich's office of like, just throw the regulations out.
Yeah, too regulatory. See, the Republicans are carrying the water for the Bell operating companies. It's that simple. And it's